Hey, fake internet expert Adam Ragusa here. I'm going to teach you how to build a fire in a fireplace while at the same time explaining why you shouldn't believe anything I say. Let's go. It's generally advisable to keep your firewood covered if you keep it outside, just to keep it dry, but I don't want to have like a big tarp all the time in my driveway, so I just leave it open like that. It does matter if the outside of the wood is wet, but it matters a lot more if the inside is wet from having, still been alive. So when you cut down the tree and you chop it down into logs, what you have to do is you have to season the pile for a long time, like leave it outside for like a year to dry out inside. Why I season my firewood instead of my etc. etc. In order for wood to burn, it needs access to both heat and oxygen. How do you get heat and oxygen inside some super dense mass like this, especially in the early stages of fire building when you don't have that much heat available? How do you get the heat and the air inside of here? Well, you open it up. We got to split at least a few of these into smaller pieces to create more surface area to expose to both heat and oxygen. So I won't do this for all of them, but this is just for the logs that I'm going to use to start the fire. And I don't know if there's an easier way or a better way to split wood. There probably is. You know which channels to watch. Yeah, but here's how I do it. Hey, let's see if my luck holds. I'm not an expert at splitting wood. I'm not an expert at building fires. I'm not an expert at cooking or sciencing or any of the other things that I do on the internet. I'm just a guy. Oh, come on now. Just a guy who happens to be paid handsomely to do stuff on the internet. I'm not an expert, and you ought not regard me as an expert. And indeed, you ought not be disappointed or feel betrayed or disillusioned if it turns out that I'm not an expert, because you should know that I'm not. Expertise is rare. Most people will have time in their lives to get really good at something. Ugh, darn it. But only a few of them are going to be truly great at something. Therefore, it stands to reason that if you are one of the very few people who are great at something, if you're one of the elect, if you are great at something, odds are you're only great at one thing, because greatness is inherently rare. Being great at two things instead of just one thing is just as unlikely as being great at one thing is, which is to say, it's pretty unlikely. I don't think we should necessarily believe everything that the quote-unquote free market tells us, but let's just assume for a second that the capitalists are right. What is the market telling us right now? It seems to be telling us that I am good, perhaps even great, at making YouTube videos. I mean, you're here, right? You've chosen to be here among practically limitless options, so I must be doing something right. Either you're real dumb, or I'm really good at doing this. Let's just choose for a second to flatter ourselves and assume that you're not dumb. In fact, I'm good at doing this. I'm great at making YouTube videos. Yay! Or maybe I'm just really good at selling products in YouTube videos, which provides me with money that I can then use to make more YouTube videos. Let's consider that possibility together while I tell you about Factor, sponsor of this video. Hey, I'm hungry from all that wood chopping. Factor delivers fresh, not frozen meals right to your door, chef-crafted and dietitian approved. There's plans available to support whatever your eating goals may be. And my eating goal is to snack on less packaged junk on my busy days when I cannot cook. This is a fresh meal that I microwaved in 2 minutes. And check it, that's a medium filet, beautifully pink inside. That's a meal that came in the mail, and I really couldn't do much better cooking it from scratch. That's delicious. You can get the high-protein meals for performance like I do, or you can get the Calorie Smart, the veggie, all kinds of options. Take the daily task of feeding yourself something fresh and nutritious and convert it into someone else's job, at least some of the time. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code RAGUSIAFB50 to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for a year. That's RAGUSIAFB50 at factor75.com. 50% off your first box plus free breakfast for a year. Thank you, Factor. Anyway, fire. So the wood that I do like to keep kind of bagged up and away from moisture are these little like store-bought kindling sticks. Once you've got a whole big fire going with like lots of heat, you can throw almost anything on there and it'll burn. You could throw a human being on the fire and they would burn, even though we are mostly water. But in the beginning of the fire making process, when all you have is the heat of a little lighter or a match or anything like that, what you need is something that's like easier to set on fire. So these are like kiln-dried, little custom-made kindling sticks that are made precisely for the purpose of getting your fire started. I mean, sometimes I gather up dried leaves or twigs or sticks or whatever, but I mean, these are actually still kind of wet right now, come to think of it, so that's why I'm lazy and I buy the thing that was kiln-dried. So anyway, if I'm great at making YouTube videos, what are the odds that I also happen to be great at doing the things that I make YouTube videos about doing? Not great, right? Because the odds of me happening to be great at a second thing on top of the first thing, those odds are just as remote as the odds of me being great at the first thing in the first place, which is to say, the odds are pretty bad. That's the law of independent trials. Which may not be completely applicable here because human achievement is not as simple as a roll of the dice. Humans have agency. We can decide that we want to try to be great at something and then work toward that goal. And if we also happen to be blessed, if we have some combination of inherited aptitude, resources, a positive environmental situation into which you were born, a society that incentivizes you to achieve, if you have some of that, then you might have better odds than another person at being great. And being great at two things, if you're really, really blessed. So yeah, I think there are like contingent situations in which a person might be more likely than others to be great at multiple things. It's not just as simple as the law of independent trials, which deals with, inanimate objects, not creatures with agency. But what do I know? I'm just a YouTuber. I don't know anything about statistics or economics or social sciences. Actually, I know a few things about all of those things. I'm not great at any of them. All we know is that the market is telling us right now that I am great at doing this, talking to you through a camera on the social internet. But let's not necessarily believe everything the market tells us. Anyway. Kindling. I want to maximize airflow around these pieces when I'm trying to get them lit in the first place. So I don't want to just like dump them in a pile and then try to get them hot. Rather, I want to like kind of Lincoln log them, just kind of stack them like so to create a lot of airflow around the individual pieces, provide a lot of oxygen, which is necessary to all combustion, but particularly so in the early phases of it when we're trying to generate more heat. And then these thinner pieces of the logs that we split, I can also assemble log cabin style on top of my kindling, like so. And then maybe I'll take like one larger unsplit log and then I will put that on the very top of the pile, at the back of the pile, so that when this pile inevitably like burns down, crumbles, and collapses, I want this log to roll backwards toward the back of the fireplace instead of rolling forwards into my living room. Now, because I know that I'm not an expert in any of the things that I demonstrate on the internet, I try to favor I statements, like we're in therapy or something. I build my fire this way. I cook my soup that way. You can take that for what it's worth. I'm not saying it's the best way. I'm not saying it's the only way. I'm just saying it's the way that I do it. And that conveniently maybe absolves me of some legal responsibility. If somebody out there burns their house down trying to set a fire in their fireplace, they can't say, hey, Adam Ragusa told me to do it this way. All they can say is that Adam Ragusa said this is the way that Adam Ragusa does it. Let's not test that legal theory, shall we? I do think that one reason why instructional content may not be quite as bossy and prescriptive as it used to be is that it is now less sheltered from immediate scrutiny. Like if this was still the 1980s and I was making like a home video VHS series on home cookery, I might be tempted to say something like, the proper way to make a soup is XYZ. And I wouldn't hear that many contradicting opinions. Like I might get a few angry letters in the mail. I could easily dismiss those as the scribblings of a crackpot. Now, when I get on the social internet and talk about how to make soup, if I were to say, hey, the only way to make a soup is XYZ, well then a whole lot of people will immediately be chiming in with their contradicting points of view. And that is epistemically humbling in a way that I think is like mostly really good. I am no longer so sure that I know the best way to make a soup. So rather than telling you what to do, I just tell you what I do, which at the very least is less directly challengeable. So like thin and dry as these little sticks may be, they're still awfully thick and there just isn't enough heat coming out of this teeny little lighter to ignite something that's so thick. We need something even thinner that's exposed to even more oxygen for the purposes of starting our combustion, and this is usually when I raid my recycling bin. Go looking for some little, piece of cardboard box or something, ideally something that doesn't have a lot of tape or other plastic on it, because I don't want to be breathing in those fumes. But anyway, I'll find myself a box, and then I might even stuff it with a little bit of a paper towel, just because this is going to be even easier to ignite. And if I'm having trouble getting my fire going, like my wood's really wet, it's just not catching, what I might even do then is just grease up my paper towel a little bit, just to kind of turn this into like a little oil lamp, which will burn hotter and longer and help us set everything else on fire. Not necessarily great in terms of like cleanliness. This is going to send some yucky stuff up the chimney that could build up over time and be a problem. But it's only just a teeny little bit of it, so I don't think it's really going to be a problem in practice. Plus, I get my chimney cleaned professionally once a year, as you should too. And the only reason that I'm willing to be prescriptive about that is because that is what the experts say. That is their advice. And remember that I am not an expert at starting fires or cooking or doing anything. I'm just an expert at making videos about how to do things, which is completely different from being an expert at how to do things. Open up the back side of this for even more airflow through everything, right? And I can just jam this kindling box underneath the stack. My chimney is open. That's important because I don't want to gas my family to death. Also, it's important that it is no warmer than 50 degrees Fahrenheit outside, 10 degrees Celsius. You need to have a pretty big temperature difference between the fireplace and the environment outside in order to reliably kind of pull the smoky air up of the chimney and then out to where it's safe. You need this warm air to be sufficiently less dense than the outside air to make it buoyant so that it floats up. And I'm pretty sure that I basically explained those physics correctly, but I'm not a physicist, I'm not an expert in anything, I'm only an expert in this. All right, I'll get the paper towels inside my little kindling box ignited. The cardboard is bigger and denser than the paper towel, so it gets even hotter, hot enough to make the wood kindling ignite, which is bigger and denser enough to create enough heat to make the split logs on top of the kindling logs ignite, which then get hot enough to make that big log at the very top ignite. So there you go, that's how I start a fire. There are probably better ways to do it. Consult below. Anyway, why are we talking about this? Well, there have been a few high-profile incidents lately on YouTube where people got kind of discredited or called out because it turned out that they were not quite as expert in their core content area as people might have believed. I don't want to join the pile-on, so I'm not going to mention anybody by name. I don't think any of them are fire-starting influencers, so let's go with that as our hypothetical example. If you follow somebody who makes videos about how to start fires, you ought to assume that the thing that they are great at is making videos about how to start fires, not that they are great at starting fires. This marketplace here only selects for someone who's great at making the video, not necessarily someone who's great at actually doing the thing. And this is a phenomenon that predates the internet. Carl Sagan was a famous astrophysicist on TV. During his day, in the English-speaking world, he was probably the most famous scientist, period. And he was a real scientist, a qualified, credentialed scientist. But he was not a great scientist. He was denied tenure at Harvard. Sagan was good at doing planetary science, but he was great at talking about it. And being great at talking about it is what got him jobs lecturing about it, and then writing about it, and then talking about it on TV. A naive person watching that TV show in the 1980s might have concluded, oh, this scientist is on TV because he is the greatest, most important scientist of the day. And that person would have been wrong to conclude that. Are you that naive in how you consume the internet today? Well, of course you're not, which is why you ought not be surprised, shocked, dismayed, disillusioned, or anything like that when it turns out that your favorite XYZ YouTuber isn't that good at XYZ. What they're good at is talking about XYZ. That is the job you've effectively hired them for. If there's one thing I've learned explaining things for a living my entire career, it's that the people who are really great at actually doing stuff are very often terrible at explaining it. In fact, they're usually terrible at explaining it. They're so bad at explaining it that you might wonder if they even really know what they're talking about, but they manifestly do because they're great at the thing that they're great at. And greatness is like lightning. It usually only strikes once, if at all. Now, rare does not mean never. Rare still happens sometimes, and indeed there are people whose jobs or whose lifestyles may make them more likely to be struck by lightning, thereby enhancing their odds of being struck by lightning twice. It does happen. Similarly, there are people who are more likely to be great at two things, potentially, rather than just one thing. But still, most people, if they're great at anything at all, they're going to be great at one thing. And if you expect your YouTubers to be great at making YouTube videos and great at doing the thing they make the videos about, well, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. You cannot expect extraordinarily rare things to happen. You can only be delighted when they occasionally do happen. So once I got my fire really going, I don't need to be nearly so precious about it. I can just throw increasingly big logs right on top of it, though I do try to prop them up so that there's plenty of airflow around them. The best heat is going to come from these glowing coals that are falling to the bottom. Basically, that's charcoal, almost pure carbon. It's going to burn really hot and really clean because the only byproducts of total combustion of pure carbon is carbon dioxide and water vapor. So I try to just kind of like sweep those hot coals underneath everything to concentrate all of that heat up in this column. And if I do that, if I've got a good bed of hot coals down at the bottom, I can throw almost anything on top of here and it will burn, even really huge logs or potentially even human flesh, but let's not do that. So there you go, that's how I make fires. I'm not particularly good at it, I'm particularly good at this. And you know what? I think that's good enough. So in terms of everything else I tell you, take it for what it's worth.